When do you pause when it comes to work? Just how many work hours in a day are good enough? Are you one of those who misses lunch breaks? These are some of the questions that almost everyone in the workplace is now asking. And you know why.
Our youngsters must say, this is my country. I want to work 70 hours a week. Somehow our youth have the habit of taking not so desirable habits from the West.
That was Infosys founder N.R. Narayanamurthy speaking on the 314 Capitals podcast, which has kicked off a series of debates around employee productivity. Many industry captains like Sajjan Jindal, chairman and managing director JSW Group, Bhavesh Agarwal, co-founder of Ola Cabs, and others align with Murthy's vision of what it takes to build and grow. But there are just as many on the other side, such as Ronnie Screwvala, founder of Upgrad, and Harsh Mariwala, chairman of Marico Group, talking about the much-needed balance and not stretching till you break. All of this has snowballed into livid arguments across all social media platforms and even boardrooms, spreading like wildfire. And this fire is still blazing hot. Sides are still getting picked up. So then what is the right formula to being productive? To which set do you belong? All work and no play? Work hard, party harder? Maintain a work-life balance? Hard work pays off, just hold on. Or simply just stretch till you break. Only the Queen's soundtrack, I Want to Break Free, at an all-time insane level can do justice to reflect the long work hour sentiments of many. We try to decode this dilemma here as I speak to employees who at some point of their career graph worked long hours, but soon gave up their over-demanding jobs to find work-life balance. They tell us about the impact of long hours on their health and even productivity. These employees did not wish to reveal their identities, and so we changed their names. I seek answers from Rajesh Padmanabhan, who calls himself a business transformation specialist on the future of work. He has led the HR function across firms including Wellspun, Vedanta Resources Limited, Capgemini, the Oberoi Group, among others. I also speak with my colleague, Kiran Sombanshi, who is part of ET Intelligence Group and recently did a fabulous story on employee productivity. It is Friday. I am Prachi Verma, your host from the Economic Times, and you're listening to the episode Long Work Hours, Productive or Punitive. This is the Morning Brief. Do long hours count? Or should one look at only productivity? Long hours, especially if continued for eternity, leads to burnout, mental and physical fatigue. Work and personal lives get blurred. There are no boundaries. Relationships may also suffer as one is left exhausted at the end of the day. The International Labour Organization has said the 70-hour work week is not mandated under any national law in any country. Let us hear straight from one of the employees who worked long hours and faced the brunt of it. I speak with Amit on this, who tells us why long hours have not worked out for him.
Myself, Amit. I am presently working for German-based car manufacturer, but I was with other company which is a service company, and they had their own product on the mechanical shop. I've seen that my early days, like where I was in the production, where the manager suddenly used to come and say, like, you need to work for the third shift or the second shift continuously. They won't be having a proper sleep or rest, where next day they used to suffer a lot. Same thing used to happen in the service industries also. Suddenly some urgent work comes, we need to stretch. There was no other option for us because limited resources used to be there, so which used to affect the deliveries. or the calculation of the hours which we need to deliver within that. After we heard this statement, like everyone was angry. So many management people will be hearing those kind of things. So they want their people also to be stretching. So these kind of statements should not be put into public forum.
A break from work, on the other hand, can give a much needed shot in the arm to increase productivity. This is an established fact. Should one compromise then and go extra mile where work steps into one's personal life? Especially in a job market flooded with a surplus of overqualified people who have to compete for limited job options. On the other hand, is the fear of AI and automation on the future of work. I speak to Rajesh Padmanabhan to get some of these questions answered. A very good morning, Mr. Padmanabhan. I wanted to understand what your opinion is around the long working hours. You know, the whole debate about 70 hours a week that has actually taken the entire social media by storm.
Good morning, Prachi, and absolutely delighted to be on this podcast. Yes, the 70 hours debate has really gone viral. And I guess there are a lot of issues pertaining to that which are popping up. So it makes a perfect topic for a debate. There have been many precedences of long working hours. So if I were to just look at even sectors like, take the world of lawyers, take the world of accountants. I mean, unspecified, they always work very long hours. Media, entertainment, communication has been another space which have always had not clearly defined hours. And then you have a lot of unorganized workforce, which actually got divided between the 8 hours and the 12 hours, particularly in manufacturing and factory environment. Transport sector has been another one, which has been been long hours, and wholesale and retail trade. Come to the services side to answer your question very specifically. I think services have been very regulated, which actually has been operating between anywhere from 45 to 50 hours kind of an environment by and large. And some of them have spilled over to maybe slightly over 50. But the magic spot of productive work, I mean, if you look across globally, seems to be something like an 8.6 hours per day. But, the issue that one needs to recognize is that work is a subset of life and life is not a subset of work. I think that redefinition has happened in the last few years. And that is why the issue of all of this, which actually cuts across so many demographic divides in this society, will need to be addressed. On the other side, IT services, I have seen is clearly, and IT services, and I'll even take banking to some extent, are very defined hours. And by this, what I really mean is there's something called as, core hours, where you need to be there. I mean, you've got to have your heart, mind, soul really being there. Then you have something like the stretch. Stretch is like, you really manage your workflows reasonably well. And within that stretch, the third element that comes in is max. You know when you're going to max out as far as working hours are concerned. And finally, there's a tipping point, which I call the overflow. So again, just to break it down, I think there's core, stretch, max, and overflow. So services is very well regulated. People understand the acceptance, the culture, and the overall adaptability to how this has evolved over a period of time. That's how the world has operated so long. But as we move along, I guess we will need new formulas.
I also have another question. As you have immense amount of experience, have you actually seen the working hours condensing over time? We hear from our seniors, or even when we have a younger person joining any organization, we say life is easy for you, especially post pandemic. Whereas we used to work long hours. And I've also heard my own seniors telling me, hey, Prachi, your working schedule is nothing. We used to come at 9 o'clock and leave at 9 o'clock in the night. So over these 35 years or, over these 3 decades, have you seen the work hours shrinking? Is there some flexibility that has come across all sectors? Do you see this happening?
Great question. Great question. And I'm going to take a little longer response on this. Number one is we all have been listening to this work hours, which has been a very top-down telling in the organizational hierarchy. Number two, we always lived with this belief that, we need to churn a lot of hours to be successful.
I'm Aditya. I've been working as a software developer for 4 or 5 years now. Currently working as ST2, and I have a BTech in computer science, and I'm of age 27. So I think most people, like in our scenarios, because of the even in Indian culture and everything, hard work is given a lot of value. That the amount of hours you put in is directly proportional to your success, which is a fair enough assessment to a point. But the hours you put in are not all execution that you can put in. You do need some hours there where you learn things and you try to expand your horizons and get better at what you're doing, right? There is a reason people train and there's a reason people practice, but somehow that is not a thing that is considered in jobs or anything. So the issue that comes up when you ask someone to work 10 hours a day on things that are not directly repeatable, or that you can just do with your muscle memory, that your brain will get fatigued like any other muscle. It will start taking you longer to solve the same problems that you would solve if you were working with a less fatigued brain. So eventually, let's say if you get your employee or whoever to work 2 hours more, they've essentially worked around half an hour of work that they would actually give you. And at that point, it becomes counterintuitive for both you and employer. And it just becomes a thing of, metric chasing where you're like, okay, this employee is giving me 10 hours or this employee is giving me 12 hours or whatever. And that sort of defeats the purpose. But I think if tech claims to be the, revolutionizing thing and the revolutionizing industry that it is, I think it should get beyond these vanity metrics and actually look at like just what people are doing and what is giving them actual end results that are better. And if you want to go for the long run, you don't want people who are burnt out and hate your company.
That's been the values and the belief system that we've all grown, particularly, in a developing country like ours. We have seen the shift from an industrial to a technological to a digital kind of evolution that we are in. The balance lies actually in bringing productivity and excellence together.
And Mr. Padmanabhan, as an industry veteran, do you see the workhouse shrinking, without any compromise on employee productivity, so to speak?
Pandemic was definitely an example when many businesses did downsize their number of hours, but they also did something consequently, which many of them did, was also do a compensation correction. So they said that, this is not the time we will be able to pay you 100% of what we are paying. So there were reductions to the extent of anywhere from a 5%, 10%, which went up to a 25, 30, and in occasional cases went up to even 50%. So that was one time when I really saw massive corrections, and when a lot of businesses and when a lot of leaders lost their balance in terms of how to really handle business viability vis-a-vis existence, vis-a-vis what is right. The conflict between the heart, mind, and the soul really peaked out at that time. I think there is direct correlation. Answer the objectively, if I were to answer, the answer is yes. But in a digital era as this, there is a lot of smart working that's coming into play. In 8 hours, effectively, if I were to get a lot of smart working done in 4 hours today through gig workers, I would need to possibly pay more than double today. So the skill part of it is something that has got to be addressed. So look at the amount of graduates that we roll out in India today. We are almost churning out. If I were to look at the amount of registrations, it's something like a 17 million undergrads and grads that go through the process. 9.5 million graduates are churning out year on year, out of which 1.5 are engineers and quasi engineers. The industry absorption is as low as 20 to 25%. So we need to talk about employment, employability, skills, and so the entire aspect of this productive hours, which actually gets freed up by smart working, needs to be channelized into reskilling and upskilling so that you're going up the value chain and it's not number of hours in isolation. That's the point I'm trying to make.
As you said, productivity at the end of the day matters. So then what about the organizations? Are all organizations measuring the productivity of employees? I think that is not being measured, what I understand from my interactions, the candid conversations that I have with employees. They want the employees to be working for a certain number of hours irrespective. whether they are productive or not productive. Or let's say they crunch down their 10-hour work into 5 hours and they are done. But yet their employers want them to be logged on, or maybe at least be in the office for the rest of the 5 hours. What do you have to say on this?
The answer is in the question itself. I think I would also allude to the fact that there's not decent amount of maturity as far as measuring productivity is concerned. Where do you actually push for higher number of work hours and productivity? So that's classically the situation. So one is a manufacturing situation where longer the hours, you churn out more in terms of volume, more in terms of number of units. That's one side. On the services side, when it's billing and when your client is billing and paying you on the basis of number of hours, companies as an interface would like to get to that model and say that even if you do your work in x a number of hours, the client is paying for this, so you need to show up. So productivity measurements as a maturity is clearly not there across, except for very select process driven industries.
So, in this debate of long working hours, how important is the overall well-being of employees? Do you see stress levels rising due to these long working hours after a while?
Now, the aspect of driving an employee or an associate towards working in terms of number of hours also has got to be opened up in terms of how you look at the policy. For example, the entire wellness and the flexibility and the recognition of how we handle wellness, or even, to that extent, mental wellness, is something that industry or nobody understands. The maturity of how you understand wellness, how you handle it in the corporate and the industry is absolutely at its abysmal low, is what I would say. Because today being sensitive and being aware is just one part of it. But would anybody know how to handle this? Not really. We started recognizing and handling this when the pandemic was at its peak. All of us were possibly sensitized to a little extent. We had no other recourse. So possibly we stretched ourselves to do a few things which we never did. But otherwise, I think the aspect of cognitive policy making, cognitive diversity, how do you really understand inclusion? How do you understand diversity and inclusion in workplace? How do you handle mental wellness? This in isolation, if you were to again correlate that with number of work hours, have we even scratched the surface of the other side? Do we even know? We still have no clue. So it's not number of hours. Look at the entire numbers that I gave you in terms of industry absorption, employment, employability, literacy, skilling. All of them come together. Do we even need this kind of number of hours? Who is even questioning? Is there even a basis for 70 hours a week? If India is growing at anywhere from a 6.8 to 7% GDP, and if the entire workforce to work at 48 hours without leakage, I think we would surpass the GDP that we want.
Speaking from the employee's point of view, I'm just thinking of myself, as a number that you had put forward in terms of industry absorption and the number of graduates, the number of engineers available, which is I think, far exceeding what the industry currently needs. Don't you think there'll be an underlying pressure? I mean, yes, this debate on one side, even though the companies have not mandated the 70 hours a week, but unconsciously, aren't all of the employees, like even me for that matter, would start thinking the longer I work, probably, I'll look more productive in my organization. Do you think this is going to lead to some, stress, maybe indirectly among employees?
The answer is yes. It would definitely lead to stress. WHO prescribes 55 hours a week. I mean, they're saying that anything beyond 55 would mean early death and, more related burnouts and heart-related problems.
There are indeed repercussions of working long hours. Let us now come to Amit, who too suffered in his last job.
I have seen from the health point of view, there were some issues. I had this gastric problems, and because being in a production, I needed to stand or walk continuously in the shop floor, or like body ache was there, and proper sleep was not there. It used to affect, like I used to get regular headache. All those kind of issues were there. And in the night, suddenly someone says to you to work for the third shift continuously, proper food was not there. So all those things affected in that way.
Now, the intuitive belief that, I work more, I am automatically more productive and I'm being more efficient is not true. It is the quality of how you distribute your pie chart. Basically, if we were to look at the entire work hours or the entire aspect of how you analyze work, there are 5 elements. So let me split this. Doing is the actual involvement of the hands and the legs and the physical, you're actually doing it. Supervising is just the expertise which guides the entire workforce just to ensure that you're more efficient. Managing is slightly a larger ecosystem, and the managers are the real strong interfaces who really get the entire work done and they manage much bigger workforce and an ecosystem. Guiding are the senior guys. Senior management is what is supposed to be guiding. And being, let us recognize, that's the board. So just the board being there gives you that kind of a comfort. The trajectory and the overall aspect of how you steer the entire enterprise is moving in the right direction. Now, these are the 5 elements. Now, when you say 70 hours, now assume you're in mid strata. If you're in the lowest strata, which is the doing part of it, maybe it contributes very high amount of productivity, 100%, no questions about it. But if you're supervising, then maybe you need to be skilled enough or you need to ensure that you're imparting more skill to the doers to make that person more efficient. And if you're managing, I think the lesser and lesser time that you spend supervising someone and eliminate work duplicacy is what quality of work is all about. Now, if you look at it, I think today is an era where you don't need too much of supervision in a digital era as this. If machines have taken over a lot of what we do, and if generative AI as a workflow is enabling that to make it better, whether it is manufacturing or a product or services or consulting for that matter, why even have so much of time doing what? This is not an industrial era. This is a digital era. It's not even a tech era. It's a digital era.
I have another question here. In any organization, I think there would be a Gen X segment, millennials, Gen Z, and there'll be baby boomers as well, right? So is it a Gen Z issue? There's this whole talk about, agility and flexibility being most sought after by Gen Z. Or is everyone, irrespective of what generation they belong to, is everyone looking for it, especially post-pandemic?
Generations which are working right now, if you were to look at the 5 generations of workforce, and possibly the first time you're seeing all 5 workforces really involved and working together. Most of the decision makers would belong to the baby boomers era, and baby boomers are primarily technology migrants. They're not technology natives or they're not the digital natives. They've not grown with technology, they've absorbed technology and they've possibly understood. And they, in turn, are the decision makers of the industry, of the economy, of the future, etc., etc. Now, here is where the challenge is. You have at the base of the pyramid, which is like the Gen Z, the Gen Z plus, and possibly the Gen Y, which is sitting at the belly of enterprises today, which does not know which side to go. So today, the pressure of how a Gen Z or a Gen Z plus would all respond and act are with very low attention span. They understand technology. They're born with understanding of technology, the speed at which they deal with things. Now, to them to go and say that number of hours is the only way to work is like saying that you work and if you find time, you have a life, is not going to work at all. I mean, it's going to be, the debate will snowball. I think it's snowball into something really big. Instead, I think if you really make it grow into a value proposition where you really push it up the value chain to say that if you involve more hours into learning, and if there are more hours which go into a balanced growth as far as you're concerned, and if you say that this will have a unique experience which will actually build you and which will balance your entire life work, then maybe there is a connect that established. Now, baby boomers to a Gen Z or a Z plus is like, I'm telling you 70 hours is the era. I'm telling you that 70 hours is the only way for us to grow as a nation. I'm telling you that 70 hours is the only way, is the only future. Now, this top-down thrust is not something that will be taken very well. Instead, the sweet spot is somewhere in between. The entire sweet spot is learning, growth, and experience. We need to tell the workforce in terms of how you're going to learn more, how you're going to grow in a very fulfilled manner, much beyond work. And what is that unique experience where there will be fun and fulfillment and satisfaction so that you really look at life holistically and, work is just one part of it, which really turns out to be highly productive.
So, one question that comes to my mind because, pre pandemic, the work life was different for everyone. So, has the work during the pandemic, which became so flexible, has it made the entire workforce slightly, laid back, lazy? Do you see that the pandemic has a hand to play in terms of reducing the number of hours or even productivity?
Genesis of what you said is possibly true. There has been an erosion of trust, particularly during the pandemic. But it was something that where everyone was going through, and there were issues on both sides. So it evolved, and today, if you would look at it, I guess it is heated up to a stage where you can't have a unilateral push through to say that I need more hours and more productivity when there is no absorption, when there's no employability. Look at a classical IT services scenario, which we all possibly understand and which we've grown up with in the last 2 decades. Today, if you were to look at, I think in the last 2 quarters, this is the first time in the history of India, which has always grown in terms of number of people. The last 2 quarters, all of them have degrown on people, almost all of them. So that clearly tells you what has substituted the number of workers is actually smart working. So it's more of AI, more of digital penetration, and more of value that is coming through. Because if you were to track results as far as efficiency of P&Ls are concerned, it clearly tells you that margins are not so much under pressure. So where is the money coming from? It's all coming from being more efficient. So naturally, the issue of absorption, the issue of understanding how much do we need, just for a minute, I think step back and understand if IT services today were to get to a 70 hours of workforce, I don't know whether the existing workforce will need to be trimmed by as high as maybe, even up to a 20 to 25%. I don't know. I'm just throwing a number. I mean, I've not done the work on that. But do we understand? We're not hiring more people, going to do the same amount of work with lesser number of people. Is that a balance between how we run a business and the larger national and the societal issues? I think that's where the challenge is. Instead, to tell you that there's going to be so much of efficiency release through hours and let me ready this workforce for tomorrow is a balance. So if I work for 8 hours today, I work for 6 hours and 2 hours I use for upskilling and building future for the enterprise and for myself. That's the balance. And it's not to tell me that, I need only 6 hours, divide that by the number of hands and legs that I need, and the remaining 20% needs to be trimmed out. That will not work in a growing economy like ours. Otherwise, you'll see workforces coming down and the absorption being higher and higher. And we don't know what we need to do. And this will lead into a much bigger issue. This will snowball into burnouts, and this will lead into further downsizing. That could be the next natural impact, which we'll be talking maybe 1 year from down the line. Because at 6.8% economic growth, do we need this kind of a number? Somebody needs to tell, some economists need to tell me this, whether this number is really something which is needed for us in a land of people surplus, particularly.
Can pandemic also be counted as one of the factors for a shift in employee mindset towards flexi work hours? Is the pandemic responsible in any way to lead us to this hot debate? I turn to my colleague Kiran Sombanshi, who recently did a story on employee productivity. Hi, Kiran. Can you tell us about what exactly does it talk in terms of employee productivity across Indian companies?
The employee productivity has steadily gone up in the last 5 years. So in financial year 2019, it was 1.5 crore per employee contribution to the revenue. And now it has gone up to rupees 2 crore in FY23. So there has been an increase. Now, obviously, when you look at that increase, it's just not solely about, the same employees working so much more, but there are other factors to look at in the sense that there are other things in play like more tech adoption, because this was also the period that coincided with the pandemic. We saw a dip in the productivity in the pandemic year in financial 2021. So, and then after the pandemic year, we saw a steady increase in the productivity. So that shows that the tech adoption or the digitalization also helped improve the productivity.
So it also had the automation bit in terms of the tech.
Yes, because when I spoke to a couple of economists to kind of understand why there has been this 36% increase in productivity, and those economists told me the same thing, that capital deepening is at play. What they mean by capital deepening is the fact that capital is increasingly replacing labor in a small way, but it is doing so steadily. And interestingly, the staff cost as a percentage of revenue has kind of been maintained. So despite this increased productivity, the increased productivity has not come by paying employees higher than your revenue growth. So your staff cost as a percentage of revenue, as a proportion of revenue, has been maintained at 10%. So your budgets that you spend on employees have not gone haywire or gone up. So the productivity has come with the cost being maintained at the sustained level.
And what about the number of employees? They have gone up, remained same, or come down?
Yeah, the number of employees have gone up. So if I look at the total in FY19, it was 61.5 lakh cumulative employees for 500 companies. And that have grown to now 71 lakhs at the end of FY23. So we have seen increase. It's not that automation has replaced or decreased the number of employees. We have seen an increase, but they have become more productive.
So what about the sectors? Have you seen some kind of a variation across sectors, so to speak?
Yeah, so there is a clear variation as far as sectoral comparison when it comes to certain sectors like auto or FMCG has shown a remarkable increase in productivity compared to certain others like agriculture or textiles or mining. They will have a very stagnant productivity levels. Also, IT sector overall it has a low productivity of like 0.5 crore. So when average productivity levels in FY23 revenue per employee is 2 crores, the IT sector is at 0.5 crore. The reason being the employee cost as a percentage of revenues is pretty high. 45 to 50% of revenues is spent on employee cost because there is a huge dependence on, so employee is the capital for them. So they are still relatively lower, but overall, you see, almost every sector has seen improvement in productivity.
There probably is no magic formula for productivity. We are all humans after all. Every person is unique. What may work for one may not work for another. Also, an idle mind is equally important as it gives way to innovation. Automation and increased use of tech adoption along with talent surplus are some factors that could push employees to stretch beyond limits. But is this sustainable for long? There is a job threat on one hand, and also an opportunity to take productivity to next level with the use of technology. Choice is as much with the employer as is with the employee. An employer can choose to help employees balance out the number of working hours. Another takeaway is that automation and digitization can help increase productivity. Lastly, an employee always has a choice to switch jobs for a better work-life balance. Both leaders and employees need to pause and think. Questions around productivity and how to measure productivity need to be addressed, but with all stakeholders on board, and also without compromising trust. So that's it for today. This is Prachi Verma from the Economic Times, and you were listening all about long work hours, productive or punitive, only on the Morning Brief. This episode was brought to you by sound editor Indraneel Bhattacharya and producer Surohini Jain, executive producers Anupriya Nair, Anirban Chaudhary, and Arijit Burman. Thank you for listening, and if you like this episode, do spread the word. A new episode of the Morning Brief podcast drops every Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. Don't miss it. It streams on Amazon Prime Music, JioSaavn, Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts. And of course, ET's own audio platform, ET Play. Have a wonderful week ahead. All clips used in this episode belong to their respective owners. Credits are mentioned in the description.